Hey, project people, a very warm welcome to our new episode on the Project Chatter podcast. It's great to have you back. Remember to hit that subscribe button I always screw this up, on your favorite podcast player and your YouTube channel. And you might be able to see our friendly faces, even maybe Marco's. Dale, how are you today, mate?
I'm good, thank you. I'm good. And the last time we covered anything to do with change management, there was a word that you pronounced as Prosci. I hope you've got it correct today as pro-sigh, because we've got a guest from there. But yeah, you're right. Marco has joined us because it is Martin's birthday today, the day of recording. So happy birthday goes out to Martin. But Marco, it's great to have you back. You've the shoe's on the other foot now. You've been a guest on a couple of our episodes. You're now a guest host. How does it feel?
Oh, it feels, I'm excited. I'm also, the topic I think is very interesting. So I'm really happy to be even on the other side, because that's, it's always interesting to have the both sides. So thank you for having me here.
Good on you, Marco. Now let's get into it. I thank you for that remark, Dale. I appreciate that. English is my second language. I am Australian, so you have to forgive me. But Tim, it's great to have you here, and you can help us explain and understand what is, and this is my first question, what is change management?
Yeah, very nice question. And we have been called Prosci many times, and I've been called much worse than that, for sure. So at some point we can unpack where the pronunciation of the name comes from. But change management is how we prepare, equip, and support our people through the changes that they have to go through when we're implementing organizational change in the inside of the walls of our business or our governmental organization. So if it's a new technology, a merger, an acquisition, in the end, people have to show up in a new way for that change to deliver the results and outcomes we expect. And change management is that repeatable, scalable approach to serve up to people the information they need when they need it to help them progress. Because, and I think it's really come out of a response to, the most beautifully designed solution that nobody adopts and uses isn't worth the paper that we printed out the project plan on. And so closing the gap between a beautifully designed solution and actually sustaining value for the organization, human beings are what help us close that gap. So change management is how we help them through that journey.
Yeah, that's really well put. You've obviously practiced that a few times.
Quite a few times. Do you want to hear?
Yeah.
Here's how I started. I would go fly into an airport, right, for work, and person behind the rental car counter would say, "What do you do? Are you here for business or pleasure?" And I'd say business. And they'd say, "What do you do for a job?" And my joke used to be, "Oh, wow, cool. Do you have like an hour and a half so I can tell you about it?" Which they don't think is a very funny joke, because they're just trying to get you in the car that you rented. So what I started to do is I would point at the screen that they were processing the order entry on, the registration. And I would say, "Remember last time they updated that system?" And to a person, every single person said, "Oh my God, that was the worst 4 months of our lives. They didn't tell us what was happening. Then they expected we do everything overnight." And everybody can resonate with the feeling of having been put through a change that you were not prepared, equipped, and supported for. And so I often help people get that anchor, because we've all had it in our own experience. And then I say, what we do is teach them a better way to implement that change so that that's not how you feel. I actually almost barely got back into the US coming from Canada one time, because the Border Patrol agent said, "Are you here for business, pleasure?" I said, "Business." He said, "What are you here for?" He said, "Remember the last time they updated this system?" And it was 15 minutes before he got done ranting about what it felt like to be the victim of, change by chance instead of change on purpose. So.
Yeah. I think when you bring systems into it in particular, there's always an emotive behind it, because a lot of system deployments, particularly technology in projects as well, doesn't always go the way it was meant to. And there's always reasons for that. But you've got me curious, Tim. Okay, where did pro-sigh, Prosci come from? Give me the explanation.
Great question. So Prosci, correctly pronounced pro-sigh, was founded by an engineer named Jeff Hyatt. So he's a mechanical engineer who came at the human side of change from a very engineering kind of way, right? Which is, you see that manifested in the pro-sigh approach. He was researching how to name companies and found a study at one point that if people mispronounce your organization's name, they're actually more likely to remember it. And so he took the words professional and science, put them together, and we get pro-sigh, short for professional and science, because again, that research was really the core, the foundation of what it was we did. So there's pro-sigh.
If you're Australian, it's Prosci. Well,
or Prosci.
I don't know where I picked that up from. Prosci, yeah. It sounds like a lodge. Somewhere we go skiing.
For sure.
So you're going to say something there, Tim?
No, Prosci is just fine. Yeah.
Pro-science. There you go. And I wouldn't have dreamed a mechanical engineer would have come up with this. So was he focused on change?
Yeah, so he's working on these huge transformational process optimization projects. And he started to, basically he's a really inquisitive person. And the question he started to ask is, why do some projects succeed and others don't? And can I start to identify the patterns between those that succeed and those that don't? Each and every time it was actually getting people behind the solution. The buttons always worked. It was getting people to step out of what they've done today, navigate that messy middle, and ultimately step into that new way of showing up. And so he very quickly started to see we describe change as sort of like a coin with two sides, right? Which is nice because coins and change, but there's a technical side of the change and a people side of the change. Every change there is. The technical side is where we design, develop, and deliver a solution to meet the need or opportunity in front of us. The people side of the change is how do we get our people to engage with, adopt, and use said solution. And as an engineer, he kept noticing that people side of change being what created the bigger obstacles, right? So he started to dive deeper into the research to find out what are those moving parts that will help us help our people succeed in times of change.
Yeah, that's extremely interesting. I love the history of how things develop and how they come to being and where they are today. Over that period of time, though, Tim, is there any research or data to tell us whether or not, I don't know if it's globally or by industry or by region, we either getting better or worse at understanding and tackling the human aspect to change? Or is it a case of, you get these very structured theoretical courses that people typically go through, and they're trying to implement the theory, and it doesn't teach you how to address the human aspect? And if that's being widespread taught across, generations, then it would lead me to think potentially, well, actually, no, we might not be getting better. But I just wonder with, pro-sigh, and maybe there's other organizations out there that are pushing the more human aspect on it, if there's any trending.
Yeah, I think, I don't necessarily have a data set that says over time, but what we do have a data set around is projects that tend to the people side of change and projects that don't tend to the people side of change, and the ability to make comparisons and connections across those results. We're seeing this happen in other parts of organizational behavior as well, right? You see employee experience correlated to organizational performance. So we're starting to make some of those connections. In our data, we see a 6-fold increase in likelihood of delivering results and outcomes if we can go from poor to excellent change management. There's about 4,000 project data set, points that set there. The interesting thing is you can get a 3-fold bump if you go from poor to fair. There is so much poorly managed change going on right now. And I wrote about this at one point, but never published it. But I think human beings, to make sense of stuff, we need context and contrast. So to make sense of anything, I need context. How does it relate to the stuff around it? Contrast. How are these two things similar or different? And so I realized early on, Val, I could try to explain change management to people by just describing it here, or I could give them a way to contrast. And I started using the email on Monday for training on Tuesday for go live on Wednesday. because that's one way we can tend to the people side of a change. But we all know exactly what that yields to us in terms of results. So as soon as I give you the contrast of what really poor management of change looks like, we can start to describe what does it mean to do it better. And I don't think there's any doing it right. It's doing it better serving up to our people what they need when they need it. I was delivering a presentation in Washington, D.C., September of 2016. And I was up on stage and I was really on point. I was just, my timing was good. And I had this slide build of the old email on Monday for training on Tuesday for go live on Wednesday. And this gal right up front put her hand up, which is a bold move in a room of 300 people, right? So I said, tell us your story. She goes, my company doesn't do it that way. We do the email on Monday for training on Tuesday for the system we pushed live last Thursday. And that's our experience, right? Is leaving the human side of change up to chance. But all of us know in our own personal experiences that that's not the way we actually achieve project outcomes. So,
yeah. No, it's fascinating because you talk about a measure there. We love measures. We controls people. You talk about going from poor to fair. And maybe there's a double-barreled question in here, because the one is I want to know how you assess going from poor to fair. What are some of the signs those listening in can look out for? Is my organization poor at change management or not? And how to get to fair. And then while you're talking there, I was thinking, those listening in, are they going, holy crap, now I've got to become a behavioral psychologist to, understand how people react to change. And you're probably going to say, no, you don't have to go and do that. But I just wonder how much study and learning do we have to do to enable ourselves, or are these some of the techniques that pro-sigh, I guess, has in place? And I wonder if you could share some of those tips with those listening as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So two big questions we can start to dive into. So I've jotted them down, but you might need to remind me when we get to the second one. That notion of poor to fair. So again, this is based on pro-sigh's biennial research. We have 10 factors that constitute effective change management on a project or an initiative. And I'll run you through the 7 top contributors to success that have come out of the research, again, over these 2 decades. Number 1 is active and visible participation by our sponsors. That our leaders need to lead the change, not just sign the check and sign the charter, but demonstrate their commitment and support through the way that they participate and build coalitions and communicate key message of change. So that's number 1 of the 7. Number 2 is middle manager engagement. Again, right, because these are our closest allies, our middle managers, our frontline employees. Engagement with those groups inform our ability to identify the right problems and arrive at the best solutions. Open and honest, effective communications is the next. And again, I often will draw the difference between a communication plan and a telling plan. Because every project I've ever seen has built a telling plan. Those that understand the human dynamics of change actually take that into a communication plan, where we reflect the right intent, the right message. It's the right message at the right time from the right sender to the right person through the right channel. Not just informing the organization what we've been doing, but the right message, right time, right sender, right channel, right person. So that's communication. And then we got employee engagement. So then the next 3 contributors to success are an intentional and structured approach with somebody dedicated that we integrate into the project management, the technical side. So we need a rhyme and reason to how we manage the people side of change. And it doesn't mean it's a recipe, right? Human beings are way too beautifully complex to say that there's some sort of recipe that we just plug people into. But we do understand typical human reactions in times of change. And so we can bring structure to how we help those people through that process. If it's not somebody's job, it's nobody's job. So if there is nobody on the project team charged with ensuring we're doing what it takes to drive adoption and usage of the solution, it will fall through the cracks. And so do we have, and it can be the project manager, it can be a single person, but we need a declaration of responsibility for driving adoption and usage. And then in the end, we know that the technical sides and people sides, while they're 2 sides of the coin, they're actually integrated in action, right? As we move the technical piece forward, we move the people piece forward. And so integrating around the people, the processes, the tools of project and change management, the disciplines of project and change management help us drive to those results and outcomes we're trying to achieve. So we've got about those and a couple more factors that we actually do a scoring against to see how well we're doing. The other interesting thing about a measure that we kind of throw out here, and it's interesting because it's not necessarily a measure as a conjecture, but I'd love to get your all's feelings on this because you spend so much time in the project space. We call it the key question. What % of this project's outcomes depend on people changing how they do their jobs? So what percentage of this project ROI is dependent on people adopting and using a new way of showing up? And we would contrast that to what we'd call the installation contribution to the ROI, right? We get some ROI value out of installation, but there is an adoption contribution to return on investment. And that's really where project management and change management come together to deliver the outcomes we expect. So I'd love to get your thoughts on how do you think about and reflect I saw some eyebrows raising, but this notion of the percentage of project ROI dependent on people changing how they do their jobs. Is that something we think about? Or?
Yeah, no, it's interesting. We'll go around and I'll try and give it a first go, and I'll probably fail miserably, Tim. But as you're talking, I thought to myself, coming back to the whole, most people, project professionals, have some sort of education in project management, whether it's a Prince 2 or a PMI or something. But we've spoken about this before. They don't typically tackle the human side. And when you asked that question, the first thing that popped into my mind was, yes, people need to change how much they care. That was one of the first things that popped into my mind, because I can do exactly the same process, but if I care about the outcome and the benefit more, I'll probably do it right first time. I'll probably make fewer errors. I'll probably communicate better because I'm interested in it. I'm excited. I'm passionate. It sort of gets all of those feelings started up. But maybe this is a good one to bring Marco in as well to comment on. Marco, you've been listening in there for a while now. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think it's very interesting what Tim was saying, because many times when we introduce change, it's very clear in the mind of somebody what the change will bring, but we fail miserably in making sure that this message is then brought to the broader audience. And I know that probably for a specialist like Tim, but I remember the Kotter 8 steps to change management. It actually tackles most of the things that you were saying in a structured way. But then, as usual, when you then try to apply it in reality, you have so many, you can't really divide them into clear steps, which would be probably the right thing to do. So I think people, what I found out, at least, were not big change projects, but still some changes. I found that the more you were able to convey the reason why the change was needed, the more buy-in you would have from the people. So obviously, because I used it, the Kotter 8 steps, that's the only reason. But I remember that, for example, the very first step, which is the burning platform, if you were able to use that one to bring the message of why it was really needed, then it was easier. Because then when you start to go in the next steps, they start to, to mix a little bit. So I must say, you will always find, obviously, people which just don't want to change for just as a principle. It doesn't have any. But these are the people that normally you try then to just to overcome, in a sense. I'm just curious to understand: is there a way? Because in reality, it's really chaotic in a sense. As much as control person, I would like everything to follow, a certain path, but at the end of the day, it's really chaotic. Do you have any examples or ways? Because I think when people understand, they want to change. But then, in the implementation, as always happens, you have so many competing stakeholders, and sometimes it even changes during the time, if you're talking about long time changes. So yeah, I think that the communication is key, and making sure that everybody is at least understanding the reason why. That's my personal take.
Yeah, that's an interesting take as well, Marco. Val, let's just bring you in on that topic before we move to the next one. Did you have any thoughts around that as well? Because Tim asked a very interesting question. It's a wide open one as well.
Yeah, it is.
You always have a great view on these things.
Well, I always I mean, think about the biggest challenges in terms of change management that are happening, and I'm probably being selfish talking about Australia, but right now we're in the kind of the precipice of a digital adoption, and that isn't going as well as I would have thought, right? You would think a developed country would have, with all the toys and the systems and the infrastructure, would massively adopt these technologies choices in projects, but they're not. And we're in this, what they call the quadrants called stall out, if you read the digital adoption index. And it always interests me. I've done a few presentations as well, Tim, and I think the percentage is really a massive percentage of people have yet made the leap from the old to the new. And it impacts almost every single person in projects, from engineers, where you've got BIM and digital engineering, to project controls, where we're moving to visualization management, to finance, to every other aspect of it, where automation will take over 90 to 95% of all transactions. And hopefully it will kill the email. Maybe email on Monday, maybe that'll be replaced by something else a little bit more aesthetic, maybe. But I think there is a large proportion. I couldn't give you a number because it's obviously dependent on each project, but I think there is a requirement for everybody to be working a new way. And I think COVID as well has played somewhat of an accelerant, and maybe we can get your comments on that later on, about how that's driven some of these new and fascinating changes. I understand Marco's point as well from the burning platform, and I've got some questions around that, but I would actually think there's a large percentage of people that have yet to be maybe convinced or yet to see the desirable outcome of moving to this new world or new way of working. But because projects in Australia are so big, Tim, we're talking about a road project that's 16 billion. We're talking about a rail project that's 80 billion. We're talking about a defense program of work that is over $100 billion. This is unprecedented in Australia. Never has this ever happened before. And it's all happening at the same time, which is, well, is a great idea, I guess, if you want chaos, but it's not really good for order. And I think change management is meant to kind of guide us through turbulence, and we're not quite there yet, but that's my perspective.
Yeah, interesting. Is that enough, Tim?
Oh my gosh, like I have quite a few different holes we can dive into. And Marco's notion of the answering the why, and we can talk about where that lives right in this individual milestone of change model called ADKAR. But I mean, the digital space, I think we could dive really quickly into that whole, because I think right as the pandemic started in May of 2020, I was sitting on a webinar put on by the Association of Change Management Professionals with Daryl Connor, Beth Montag-Schmaltz, and she started talking about reentry. And I make the joke that I'm rarely at a loss for words. And I sat there kind of dumbfounded, even in April 2020, thinking about the notion of reentry. After how much change had actually just happened in the first in 2 weeks, right? And Val, I started calling it the involuntary digital transformation. Because there's lots of little implications, right, when we start thinking about this. Because how long did CIOs and CTOs, chatter about digital transformation? And I think what happened is they became so enamored by the digital revolution, the zeros and ones, that they missed the transformational component, the underlying fabric of who we are, that we can mold now, given what we've been empowered with on the technology side. And I'll use the car as an analogy, that the automobile was the technological revolution. Personal mobility was the actual transformation, the shift in fabric, right? And so I think there's this interesting conversation. What are the actual shifts in the fabric that are being facilitated by this digital revolution? But then we all made it happen in a day and a half. Like, I don't know how many days warning y'all got, but at pro-sigh, we got a day and a half to move the entire operations and a face-to-face training business fully remote. Right, in a day and a half warning. And this might be a fun one to noodle on too. I often will do this thought exercise, right? What happened if our leadership team had given the company 30 days to pivot the entirety of operations to work from home? I can guarantee you, how many days do you think it would have taken? 90? 120? We would have broken it how many different ways? But instead, in a day and a half, we made it happen. And so I think as we go forward out of the pandemic, there's going to be some fascinating learning about what we all learned was possible, what we all made happen during a day and a half involuntary digital transformation. And then, Val, how do we make sure we don't lose that as we try to step forward into whatever the next transformation is? But are people, the notion of stalling out in a digital transformation on the heels of pivoting an entire country to work from home feels like an interesting paradox, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, 100%. Sorry to jump in there, but yeah, it is an interesting paradox. And that's why I'm, you know, sitting back and being an observer, it's like sitting in a movie, watching a screen that you don't really know where to start sometimes. And I can see some of the perplexed kind of looks on the faces of government and other clients that we have that they're like, where do we go? Where do we actually start change management? Does it start in the middle? Is it a middle out type of arrangement? Do we start at the start? Do we start at the end? They do need a bit of guidance, and it's great that we're talking about change. And I hope that some of the Australian guys are listening to this, because there's a lot to learn in the change acceleration piece, not just from COVID, but that change itself is a skill set.
Yep.
Managing and guiding people through that process is not something that you can just bolt on to an engineer. No offense, engineers. It's not something you can just bolt on to project controls. It's actually something you should probably go to school for. Much like any other skill set that we acquire in project management. But Dale, you had some comments there, mate?
Yeah, I've been, just thinking about it. We often say that the skill sets we pick up through projects, and generally, I think in a lot of our careers, a lot of us that take our career seriously, you can actually apply in life as well. So a lot of what you're talking about doesn't only impact your working life, but can impact your private life as well. And concentrating and understanding human behavior, I think, is quite key, because you go through life changes, right? Yeah. As you grow up, you might go to university, you get into the workplace, you might change jobs, buy a house, get married, have kids. All these weird and wonderful things happen. And how do you react to that change? How do the people around you react to that change in environment? So it's a really fascinating space to be in. And I love how, this podcast and project management has allowed us to explore all of these various avenues. As you say, we could go down so many rabbit holes. And talking of rabbit holes, I want to bring Marco in, because he loves rabbit holes as well. And I'm sure he's got a series of questions as well to throw your way. Marco?
Yeah, thanks. Yes, I'm actually really curious also, because I'm of course coming from the project control area. Is there, that in project control for the projects we have the different type of projects, the mega projects, the smaller projects, and despite the fact that we apply basically, the principles are the same, but then you apply it slightly differently depending on what you're doing. Is this the same also in change management? Because everything can be a change. I mean, I can picture the change in the big changes like a corporate change or big stuff, but there are also very smaller ones. And my question is there any differentiation in between the two, and how also the people then are affected by this?
Yeah, great question, Marco, because you're right. There are small and large changes, and there's different amounts of change management we need based on particular projects or initiatives in front of us, right? If we are replacing a beloved system that everybody who's going to have to bring it to life has put the last 15 years into building, that is a different road to hoe than replacing a system that people come in and complain about every single day, right? And so the amount of project management we need is scaled based on the technical complexity of the change, right? Val's talking about these $80 million these are huge infrastructure programs that have huge program management, project management expectations. In the same way, we scale the change management response based on the adoption challenges associated with the change itself. How big are the adoption challenges that are being introduced because of this new process, new technology, whatever the case might be? We introduced a framework called the 10 aspects of change that describe the aspects of somebody's job your project may or may not impact, right? Because I think one of the big things that change management can help us do is bring empathy to the project table. Because when I think about rolling out a CRM, a cloud-based CRM application, I haven't actually turned that into what does it mean to Andy's job, Becky's job, Charlie's job, Debbie's job. And that translation is essential if we want to support the people through the change we're asking them to make. And so we would take a group impacted by the change and say, does this impact their processes, their systems, their tools, their job role, their critical behavior, their mindset, attitude, belief, their performance reviews, their reporting structure, their compensation, their location? And once we start to wrap our heads around what does this project mean in terms of the adoption challenges it's created, because now we know what the change actually means across these dimensions, we can roll it back up and say, how much change management do we need? We also add in risk assessments to determine, the risk inherent in the change itself. And of course, how important this change is to the organization would help us scale.
Would this mean, sorry, just to add to the question is, that the PMO or project management office normally has the different figures or the different professions. And I must say, change management has rarely been one of them, in a sense that I've never seen a real, function or something, or even one person, which actually you refer to. Changes are kind of taken as granted, or we just do the change and we find a way to do it. Is there an idea of trying to bring this more, and pass me the word, in professional part, in a sense of having somebody which is then there, which can help the changes to go through, or as you said, looking at the risk or the different things?
Absolutely. We're seeing a huge uptick in the number of formal change management job roles, change management offices being established, either underneath a PMO or within like a strategy transformation office. Yeah. Down in Australia, I was getting reports last year where entry-level change management job roles were, achieving income parity with brand new project management professionals. So yeah. Certainly there's been formalization. The early 2000s was really around formalizing the discipline, the process, the structured, repeatable approach. We're really starting to see formalization around some of that structure now as well, in terms of the job roles, dedicated resources, even benefit realization offices that are starting to uniquely marry project management and change management, realizing that, go live is interesting. Day of outcome realization is relevant to the business. And that gap, that time to sustain value, is where project management and change management get to come together as real partners in improving performance of the organization. And, organizations, a lot of it depends on how bad the leader needs to get the ROI out of the project. Because if you go into an industry where senior leaders, there isn't that real pressure to deliver expected return on this project, maybe they're really financially well off in the industry, you don't see a necessity around change management. But when leaders' feet are being held to the fire to deliver expected improvement to the organization, Marco, that's where we see the people side getting really brought in. Real mature organizations start to really weave the two together, right? So we have clients that we support, and when they do a milestone mapping of all the technical milestones, we put in ADKAR milestones right alongside. ADKAR is that individual change model that we're going to dive a little bit deeper into, because Marco brought up starting with why, but we do ADKAR. Well, let's go into the milestones, right? So those are the individual milestones of a successful change. It's an acronym. The first A is awareness of the need for change, and we would achieve that if the person who's going through the change would say to us, I understand why.
Yeah.
If you say, I understand why, then that means you've achieved sufficient awareness, that milestone. Next milestone is desire to participate and support. And that is marked by you saying, I've decided to. There's a lot of things preventing you from saying I've decided to. There's a lot of things that might encourage you to say I've decided to. There's people that influence that, and that's the discipline of change management. But the milestone is getting Marco to say I've decided to. After that is I know how to. That's knowledge. That's a critical milestone so that Marco can bring these new changes to life in the way he shows up. Knowledge is the default. That's what we typically jump to, right? We have a change. We need people to do something differently. What do? Send them to training. Of course, send them to training. Yeah. Well, we all know what it feels like, right? When you get sent to a training, you haven't decided why. You don't know why you're there. You haven't decided to be there. Sit in the back of the room, deciding what you're going to make for dinner, right? So I understand why. I've decided to. I know how to. I'm able to. That's ability. I am able to. So I am able to do things the new way that you need me to when this project goes live. And so, Marco, we align ability to go live with a traditional sequential change, or we align ability with each release if we're doing iterative change. And then the last milestone is called reinforcement. I will continue to. So what are the things we can put in place to help our people say, I will continue to? What are the measures, the celebrations of success, corrective behaviors? So I understand why, I know why, I've decided to, I know how to, I'm able to, I'll continue to. Those are the individual milestones. And then we roll that back into what can we do as an organization to help roll out our projects more effectively. So we're working in a big technology firm. And I think this gets to your question, Dale, about do I need a psychoanalysis, psychology degree to do this? And Marco, to your notion of, how does it work on small and big changes? They realized that whenever change was getting rolled out, people always felt like they were getting blindsided. And so they established a protocol that each time a project issued its first communication, there were 3 headings and only 3 headings. Why now, what if we don't? So the first time I hear anything about the change, I'm getting the answers to why now, what if we don't? And in today's pandemic environment, I've added why this instead of that, because all of us are dealing with such limited caloric value to get anything done that I think we do need to explain priorities. But that's the way we take these small steps to help bring the people side of change into the rhyme and reason of how we do our projects. And it matters because our resistance tells us the number one reason for resistance is nobody made a compelling case for why I needed to take on this change in the first place. And so now we're proactively addressing that through informed communication coming out of the project team. So
yeah,
that's interesting.
That's fantastic. Yeah. I was just going to jump in there. I was thinking, where did I learn some of this stuff? I mean, you just talked about what's in it for me, I guess is what we use down here in Australia. And, that's really good because you mentioned empathy as well. And I think that's really important to have a personal perspective on change. What does it mean to every individual? How does it affect them? And you're very succinct and clear on that. And I really, really like that. And then I realized over your shoulder, I think it's probably your right-hand shoulder, I've got that book. So I think a lot of the stuff that I'd learned, I don't know when or where, was in that book on is it the right or the left? One of them. And that's the one. Yeah, exactly. And so that's a really small book, actually. What's that book? And can you tell me about the contents of that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I've got 2 books back there. One is called ADKAR, A Model for Change, written by our founder, Jeff Hyatt, and it describes the model we just talked about very briefly. The other one is called Change Management, the People Side of Change, that Jeff Hyatt and I wrote together. The first edition was released in 2003, and then we updated it in 2012. So I imagine it probably needs another iteration. And it really lays that foundation of how do we think about change from a real contextual format? How do we get change management within the context of project execution inside the organization? And then what are those moving parts that help us do better at it? I'd also point people, pro-sigh.com has loads of free resources. There's about 200 hours of recorded webinars up there. There's a whole webinar we did this April about integrating change management and project management. We really believe in an abundance of sharing the foundational components because we really think this is the right way to bring change forward. YouTube, there's a good presence there too. We have a whole series called Tim Talks that are pretty, they're little interviews of people interviewing me. I'll tell you all, and we won't tell anybody else, but we recorded them all in one sitting, but I have different interviewees the whole time. So I had to change outfits. So I did like a 2-day trip to Denver with an entire checked bag. And they had me set up in this coat closet. I felt like I was hosting the Academy Awards, except for I was in a coat closet as I was swapping out each of my suit tops and whatnot. So there's a good number of really fun little 4 or 5 minute clips to get into the basics, back to the basics of what the people side of change is all about. Yeah, that's really how we start to.
Look, we love free resources, Tim. I think it's great that you're open and you're sharing perspectives as well, even if you are in a closed closet. We would be happy to kind of share that link in the show notes as well.
Perfect.
I've got one more for you, and it might be a bit more technical, but and I didn't know what it's called. I had to look it up. It's called the Beckhard-Harris formula for change. Have you heard of that?
Yeah. Beckhard-Harris. Yeah. Is it? Let me see if it's.
There's a formula there that says D times V times F greater than R. We all love formulas, don't we? But did you know what that was about?
Yeah. So Gleicher is the guy that created it first, and it was published in some early Beckhard work. He was an Arthur Anderson accountant. And then the version you just read is Kathy Dana Miller's adaptation of it. D times V times F is greater than R. So And we can talk about the math, but I think there's some really interesting components of this, right? So I would imagine some of your folks have jotted down D times V times F. So D is dissatisfaction with the current state. Or did you want to tell what they all are, or do you want me to talk about it?
No, please.
Okay. D is dissatisfaction with the current state, right? So it's going to be the three things on the left have to be bigger than the inertia that's keeping me where I am in order to help me move. So dissatisfaction with how things are today is the first component. V is the next, which is a vision of what's possible. So can I envision a new, better way at the end of this change journey? And then the F is first steps that'll start to get me there. So dissatisfaction times vision times first steps have to be bigger than what's keeping me where I am. I have an economics background, so math does matter to me. And I'm not sure about the mathematical notion of multiplying together, except for this one real important thing that we can take away from math. If I multiply three numbers together and any of them is 0, what does that entire side of the equation go to?
0.
0, right? So I can have all the dissatisfaction in the world and have a vision of what's possible, but if I don't see any first steps that will get me moving in the right direction, that's not going to be enough. I won't get any movement. I can have a vision of what's possible and I can know what the first steps are, but if I'm not dissatisfied with what's going on today, I'm not going to take that step. Or I can be completely dissatisfied and know what the very first step is, but if I can't envision the peak at the top of the mountain, that's not going to be enough to move either. So that's the neat part about the math side of it, I think, is that if any of those approach 0, that entire side approaches 0.
Yeah, I think it's good to note that, and maybe back to Marco's point as well, or the burning platform. I mean, if you can understand the levers that drive change in psychology and people in general, I think COVID was that motivating factor, that increasing the level of dissatisfaction. And there was a first step. There was a digital adoption process. We all went remote. You could see that formula working in real time in the last couple of years, right? And that's really exciting that actually does work. We can actually pivot quite quickly if we wanted to. We just don't necessarily have that vision or that desire. And the resistance is generally quite high. Like you said, a lot of people, particularly in projects, Tim, are really comfortable with the tools that they've used, that they've been trained in, that they're experienced in. You take planners, for example, they love their scheduling tools. Some people like Microsoft Project, some people like P6, Primavera. The same thing goes for anyone else, for that matter. Engineers, ones that I've known, love Excel, and they have their own kind of poisons, I guess. So, how do you then take that formula and apply that in a company may also help with the ADKAR principle. I think just getting that formality across, and if there are people who love math, maybe that's another way of appealing to them. Have you found that as well?
Oh yeah, absolutely. If we go talk to the engineers and some of those folks, we certainly bring the math and the research forward, right? Because 4,000 data points are fun to step up against. I heard a speaker, he was from Intel at a conference a number of years ago, and he was talking about human tools, like the tools that human beings use. And he used this, so we were in Portland, he was coming out of California. So he put a picture of a butcher knife up on the screen, and then he held up a whisk, like a cooking whisk, because he's like, I flew up here, there's no way I was flying with a butcher knife. But he said every tool that human beings use have a getting work done end and a handle. A getting work done end and a handle, whether it's that whisk or that butcher knife or a shovel or your email client on your phone. Every tool has the getting work done side and the handle. And I think bringing about change, sometimes like this notion of people being connected to the tools that they use, they're so good at the getting work done end. And I think this is the challenge a lot when we try to change people's tools out, is we try to change out the handle, because we tell them, oh, your handle's no good, here's a much better handle. And they're like, no, that handle is exactly right for me getting the work done that I needed to get done. And I remember coming alongside a client, boy, this was like 19 years ago now. And they were getting ready to place this big ERP system, right? Because they had customized it so many times over that now they were generations into their customized and they couldn't get supported by the vendor. And the new solution was so much more intuitive, right? This is the project team. Oh, it's so intuitive. And I sit down next to one of the people who actually use the system every day. And I was like, I've seen how complicated it is for them to get to this one screen. And I know it's so intuitive on the new one. I said, oh, show me how to get to this screen. And he reels off like 18 keystrokes. You've watched people do this, right? Alt E, P, F, Q, 2, and boom, up comes the screen he wants. And he's like, any questions, right? Like, I think we have to realize that we're not there trying to solve for the solution. We're trying to help that person achieve success in their own job, and our ability to align the solutions we create with, it helps us, I think, remove kind of the rose-colored glasses that we sometimes bring to our solutions when we realize we're not actually solving the right problem for the person that had the problem. So.
Yeah, I agree. I think as well, software companies convince you almost that you need new products, right? There's this whole Monroe's motivated sequence type method, and they grab your attention and they satisfy your need. You've all seen the ads. Do you have sore back and a headache? And well, you need this, and like you would agree with everything they said in the pretext. So you think, well, sometimes this happens on projects, and sometimes the new solution really, like you said, it really doesn't hit the mark. We're trying to change the handle rather than the way of doing the work. And I think that's bang on. I think that's exactly what's happening in some of these organizations and we're not really anticipating how users will respond. We're just saying, well, this looks new and it's interactive. We've had many ghosts on talking about machine learning and AI. Like, we're not even ready for that. Yeah. And, I can say that hard on hand in Australia. I'm not sure what the rest of the world is like. There's probably areas where this is really advanced, but in construction and infrastructure and some of the big projects, we are nowhere near that. And I'm saying that very loud. And if anyone wants to debate me, you know where I am. But Dale, over to you, mate.
No, it's interesting. I love it. And I was just thinking, as you were saying, and those sitting down listening to this episode, when you said everyone, has sore backs, I think everyone's just sat up just to stretch the back a little bit. But no, it's interesting. Tim, I love listening in because you talk about these methodologies and models, etc. And, going on to pro-sigh or Prosci, however you want to pronounce it, pro-sigh.com, you've got these free resources, as you say, but you talk about the methodologies there, and we love a triangle on the Project Chatter podcast. And you've got two things that resemble a triangle. Well, one is a triangle, the PCT model, and the other one is the three-phase process. I wonder if you could just give the listeners a bit about that and how to apply it, where it's applicable, a bit more general, I guess, background about why it's in addition to ADCAR perhaps. So yeah, I'm just intrigued.
Very good. Well, yeah, let's dive into the triangle. So ADCAR is that individual model, right? If I'm trying to get my kid to study better, I'm trying to get the neighbor to clean up their front lawn, it describes an individual journey. The PCT model, which stands for Project Change Triangle, so there's the triangle, is in fact a triangle. To describe the 4 aspects that are necessary for successful change. Now, I know there's a bunch of people who are good at math that said, wait, triangles have 3 corners. He just said 4 aspects, but we'll get to that piece. So if you draw an equilateral triangle, the top of the triangle is leadership and sponsorship. And it provides the governance and direction that a project needs. How are we going to make trade-offs? Where are we trying to get? What's the vision? How does this align with the organizational strategy? So the top of the triangle is leadership sponsorship, providing governance and direction. The bottom left corner of the triangle is project management. And that's where we're managing the technical side of the initiative, the cost, scope, time, all of those trade-offs to manage that technical side so that we design, develop, and deliver a solution that meets the need or opportunity in front of us. The bottom right corner of the triangle then is change management. And that's the people side of the change. It's where we ensure that the solution is engaged with, adopted, and used as we bring it forward into the organization. And then the 4th aspect is the center of the triangle, and it's labeled success. And there's actually a PCT instrument that stands behind this. There's 10 questions on each of the 4 corners, 10 questions in the middle to help us gauge overall project success. I mentioned the success in the middle because it's a new addition to the enhanced methodology that we just rolled out over the last couple of months. In the middle of the triangle, it used to say meet objectives on time and on budget. which is kind of the essence of what we're going for. We actually had one of our instructors down in Australia dealing with a huge bank probably about 12 years ago. So he has the most senior leadership at the bank sitting around a table. And one of the leaders around the table said, you know what we should do is we should draw those triangles for each of our projects. And in the middle, let's actually write down the metrics of success for the project. And somebody more senior at the table said, no, no, no. If we write that stuff down, people will know, right? So there's this notion of accountability aversion that can sneak in. But those are the 4 components of the triangle: success in the middle, leadership providing direction and governance, technical side by project management, the people side by change management. And then we actually connect all the sides too, right? Because you can actually get into the real interesting interconnections between the corners of the triangle.
That's hell of interesting. Before you jump into the 3-phase process, I was just thinking as well, the triple constraint in project management, everyone knows it, but there's 4 elements: time, cost, quality, and scope. So
do you want to go down this rabbit hole for a second?
Go for it.
Because I think you're exactly right. There's the 4 components. So my father-in-law has a cabin about 2 hours outside of Boise here in the United States. So it's up in the mountains. And he was talking about how, you can get things done fast, cheap, or good. Is that what he did? Yeah. Fast, cheap, or good were his 3. And what I realized is that my father-in-law is constraining scope, right? He's assuming the work to be done on the cabin, the scope is set. So he's trading off, is it good, fast, or cheap? And then I started thinking about how project management always talks about the other trade-off, right? Do we assume quality?
Yeah.
And then we put scope, time, and cost as the 3 things at play. But yeah, you're so right that all 4 of those are at play. But I just started to realize how interesting that was, that he de facto locked in the scope. Whereas when we talk the triple constraint, we de facto lock in quality and then talk about the things that are going to trade off around it.
Yeah, it's interesting. And just thinking about it, I don't actually like the word triple constraint anymore because it feels like it's inhibiting you, right? Where we talk about creativity coming back onto projects because we need creativity to deliver faster, better, quicker, etc. Yet we talk about a constraint. It's quite interesting. Anyway, I sidetracked you.
It assumes a zero-sum game, right?
Yeah.
Where we've actually seen times where there doesn't have to necessarily be said trade-off if we start doing things a different way, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Anyway, on to the 3-phase process, because I wrote down these, and I think you mentioned them a bit earlier, but maybe we could peel back some of the layers on each of these 3 phases.
Yes, indeed. So let me close out real quick on the PCT, because I think it does a couple of things for us. It lets us talk about the relationship and connection of those components with one another. And then we actually use it as a health diagnostic over the life cycle of the project as well. So we'll do that assessment at critical points in time along the life of the project to help us hone in on what needs to be improved and identify where those risks are. So that starts to happen over the life of the project. The 3-phase process that you reference also then aligns and happens over the life cycle of the project. So phase 1 is prepare approach. Phase 2 is manage change. Phase 3 is sustain outcomes. And then each of those 3 phases have stages that live within them. So phase 1, prepare approach, there's actually 3 steps there. Define success. What are we trying to achieve? Define impact. Who has to do their job differently and how? And define approach. What is it going to take to support our people through the change that they have in front of them? And that's really where we kind of build out that strategy of what does the people side complement to the technical side solution look like. So I'll stop here and see if there's any questions kind of around how we get it started.
I'm just fascinated because listening to, I mean, not this specifically, but this included, a lot of what you're talking about, the methodologies, and we've said it on the podcast before, is around a framework where you actually have freedom. And what you're talking about in each one of these steps is actually saying, well, we're not inhibiting you, but we're guiding you along this process. It's not prescriptive, right?
Absolutely.
And I think that's where you bring in the human side. That's my observation. I don't know if that was quite what you're looking for, but that was my observation. Val, did you want to come in and perhaps try and tackle Tim's question directly there?
No, I think it's dexterity, right? And we talk about diversity of thought and a few other things, and I think that's a great objective, because I think it's the same thing as what change management's trying to achieve. It's like there's multiple paths to get to the outcome. And when we apply constraints to projects and people, we don't get quality outcomes. We actually get the opposite. And we haven't quite figured that out on a lot of projects. And when we do, I think that human path of multivariable options allows people to exercise their incentives and allows people to be motivated by change rather than resistant to change, which I see a lot on projects. Even the word transformation, Tim, can have a physical response in someone's face, or even saying change management, they can go, oh God, don't even go there, So you have to use acronyms to just slide it in there, oh no, this isn't change, this is ADCAR. So, there's ways around it, but I think, you make some really good points. I can't argue. I think it's a really, really it's a really important point to think that a human-centered approach, and I do a bit around design thinking for some of the technical things we roll out, and it's very similar to, having this human-centered approach for problem solving, which I think needs to be educated. And I've got some questions on that before we go back into it. But did you want to comment on that?
Well, I want to circle back because Dale made me think of something I've not actually thought about before. And he talked about how it didn't feel like a recipe, but it had the freedom within a conceptual container or that framework, right? And I think as we went through the 3 phases, did you hear, or the 3 stages, did you hear me utter the question that followed each one? We call them plain language questions, and they were very intentionally built into the entirety of the methodology. So define success has the plain language question, what are we trying to achieve? Define impact has the plain language question, who's going to have to do their job differently and how? Define approach has what are we going to do to support our people? And Dale, I think those plain language questions are actually what bring that notion and sense of freedom that who has to do their job differently and how is my favorite probing question, right? Like you just start to unpack, oh, what does the change actually mean? Who's going to have to pick it up first? Who is most invested in the way things, like that simple probing question, who has to do their job differently and how actually it opens the eyes to the ability to then step into and tackle it. And of course, I have a cloud-based tool that has collaboration and integration across all these aspects. It does all the scoring and everything, but I think that freedom comes from truly understanding what we're trying to achieve out of this piece. It demystifies it in a way that our hope is makes it more accessible to folks.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Val, you had a few. Sorry, Tim.
No, go ahead.
Val, you had a few. Do you want to jump in there?
I did actually. I think now just stepping into maybe some of the listeners who maybe this is the first time they've heard about change management, or they didn't see it as a craft. Maybe perceptually they didn't see the value. I think there's a lot of confusion in the value set. If you look at project controls and PMO and other projects and how they value project change practitioners, it's different across the board, but definitely the value set isn't in change. It is changing, but it's around, if you talk about a value, I think planners get the most value, as in perceptionally, they're valued because there's an intrinsic value that you can see and touch and feel, whereas change doesn't necessarily have a tangible output that you can see and touch and feel, but it definitely applies to the adoption of an outcome, right? And getting people across the line and all that stuff. But I wanted to know, for the listeners out there, if they wanted to become well-versed and you've got free resources, what if they want to become certified practitioners? Where do they go, Tim? And what's your view on being a practitioner?
Yeah, so as we alluded to at pro-sigh.com, there's those hosts of free resources, the blogs, the articles, the webinars. Pro-sigh does offer training programs throughout the organization, actually. So, the cornerstone, the bedrock that we started with was that 3-day certification program. You're required to bring a change you're working on to the program. You don't get let in through the door unless you have a real project or initiative you're working on so that you can apply it as you learn it through the course of those 3 days. You actually build towards a strategy presentation you deliver at the end of the 3rd day where you're capturing what you've pulled together around the people side dynamics of that initiative or project you've brought. So that's the real core one. Those are available in sort of an open enrollment environment. So you'll be in a class of 14 other people from 11 other organizations and maybe 5 different countries, given how everything has gotten virtualized. We also teach those at particular organizations, which opens up whole other conversations, right? Because when you're bringing project managers, business analysts, communication specialists, maybe a black belt in Six Sigma into a room to talk about the people side of change within the walls of Acme company, you very quickly get to learn all of the cultural components that underlie how change actually happens at Acme. So that's for the practitioner. The interesting thing is, I think we are seeing a growing group of folks coming to that program from not change management walks of life. So if I walk into a class of 100, and the classes are about 15, there's a handful of them that do change management as their profession. There are many more that are adding change management as a skill set to their existing craft. And so I have tons of operations, OD, lots of project managers, probably more than any other. And I had one of my favorite clients that started down this path around, I call it the leaders of the future will need to be multilingual. And I don't mean English and French or English and Italian, right, Marco? They need to be able to speak the multiple languages of organizational improvement. Project management, change management at the top, but I'm going to put knowledge management, continuous improvement, maybe agile, right? Maybe certainly design thinking, human-centered design is going to be one of those languages. And so we've done a good bit of work around those change ecosystems in an organization and how you mobilize them, but also at the individual level. How do you become this multilingual change leader? One of my favorite clients, all the change practitioners in the organization would introduce themselves to you with their major and their minor. Hi, I'm Val. I major in process control and I minor in change management design thinking. Hi, I'm Dale. I major in project management. I minor in portfolio management and problem solving. And to me, this is such a cool mindset to start to build in not only people, but also organizations, that the challenges we have in front of us are multifaceted in nature, and we're going to have to solve them with multifaceted solutions. So yeah, it's fun intersection of how all these folks kind of come together, right? So that 3-day program has people from all walks of life, and then we do role-based programs inside of organizations to really help organizations build muscle. So
I love that, Tim. I love the major minor piece.
Right.
That's a great way to just structure an approach or even introduction. Sometimes you don't know. Well, I don't really know what to call myself sometimes in a room, but I'll usually use the preface of whatever the context is in that introduction. But that's a great way, a major and I minor. So for those listening, try and use that. I've got one more question for you. Culture versus change and the correlation between the two. Now, when you change something, how does that affect the culture? And how do you bring the culture along when you do change something? Because obviously culture is very important around, and it's actually being a little bit stretched at the moment if you give the fact that we are remote now. And how do you interact and maintain those values and those properties of belief and keep that cohesive arrangement in that tribal setting? But what's your views on culture versus change?
Yeah, so I may be taking off my pro-sigh hat and putting on my Tim hat and just kind of leaning out over my skis here, but I'll give you kind of what I think. I don't think culture can ever be the villain when changes don't succeed, and culture is never the hero when changes succeed. Your ability to adapt and adjust to the culture that you're working in is really the kicker. The culture is the culture. So, and then this change is happening inside of that culture. The culture is the backdrop, the water in which we swim. And that culture will impact and shape how this journey may go forward and how we may want to make the journey go forward. But to blame a culture or praise a culture for being the success factor on a change, I think is the wrong subject-object orientation. That being said, I think organizations are being more thoughtful about how to adapt and adjust their culture, how to nudge their culture in a particular direction that they want to see it go. And so I think there is some really interesting work that's happening there in terms of how do we start to become the organization we want to become. I struggle with a lot of the cultural assessments that give you good, bad. I really have a hard time with the inside of the circle, outside of the circle, cloud bursts of culture. I'm much more of a spectrum guy. Power orientation is either hierarchical or flat. We can argue one is better than the other under certain circumstances to accomplish certain things, but culture to me is much more living along spectrums than good, bad, good, bad. So
yeah. I think maybe it's conflated with resistance a little bit, so that maybe it's just the fact that we haven't done effective change management down to the individual to say what's in it for them, and they're being impacted. And when change happens and culture is resisting, it's not a behavior element of the culture, it's a behavior element of the change execution, perhaps. And that's my observation as well. Actually, that's interesting to say that culture isn't at the center, because a lot of companies are moving, they're being more cultural aware. We are trying to be more diverse, inclusive. But then when you have what they call a negative culture, or a bad culture, you're right. You can't really measure that as the kind of reason or root cause as to why things aren't being effectively implemented or executed. Is that right, Tim, from you?
Yeah, I definitely want to make sure that it doesn't mean that I don't think culture matters. I think culture is hugely important, but it is the backdrop against which we're trying to make this play happen. And so it's that whole notion of either blaming or praising it, as opposed to realizing it is the situation in which we're living. That being said, yeah, I think there's some really interesting moves to enhancing and trying to build the culture we want as an organization. We're really doing it as a pro-sigh leadership team. We're leading with values that we think engender the culture that we really want to be the place where people want to come to work and are proud to work there. So we take it really seriously, but to me it's more that interchange. It's kind of asking that second level question that helps us get a little bit deeper into these interplays, right? There's another one around change and level of engagement in an organization. Change should just be so much easier in a highly engaged organization. No, right? And if we go back to awareness, desire, knowledge, ability, reinforcement, right? If you have a bunch of unengaged employees and you say we need to make a change, the answer is, okay, whatever you say. So it's easy to get over that first hump that the change is necessary because I don't care, whatever you say. But then to actually get them to invest in bringing the change to life in a way that would improve the organization, that's the huge mountain to climb. But you go into an engaged employee base and say, here's the change we're about to make. You know what they say? Whoa. Why are we making that change? You told me I had ownership and accountability and I was a part of this. So the awareness and desire mountains are much higher to climb over. But if we can get that awareness and desire built, now get out of the way, right? Because this engaged group of employees are going to bring this solution to life in a way we never even imagined was possible. But you've got a much higher bar to cross to get people on board with the change before you start running downhill. So I always love these where you can take an initial assumption and pull it apart a couple more times and say, there's a couple more dynamics at work here, right?
Yeah, brilliant. Tim, that's really, really insightful. I've had a great time on this pod. Dale?
Yeah, no, I was just thinking there, Tim, to your example. Typically, if you propose change and those that put their arms up and you're saying that's fantastic because they're engaged, typically the reaction is opposite, to go, no, they're actually being an obstruction to change now, right? Where you should actually take that energy and translate that into, okay, well, why are you putting your arms up and how can we bring you along and use that energy to drive the change rather than to be the obstacle? So it's quite interesting you say that. But I do want to get us onto the feature of the show. However, before we do, I know Marco's got one more question and he has been on his best behavior, but that was also been helped by his Wi-Fi issues because he's been dropping in and out for those that can't see the video. But I think you're with us now, Marco, and you've got one more for Tim.
Yeah, sorry, I was just curious because I find that this topic really fascinating because I think there are so many different views and so on. I was wondering, that in nowadays, because the money is tight each time that you do everything basically is money is tight. Are there frameworks or ways to be able to quantify, even in a very rough way? Because what happens is always probably everybody agrees that there is a change needed. That probably we even agree where the change needs to happen. But then there will always be the question: so what is the benefit in terms of of money? And my question was, I understand everything about the people, the problems and so on, but is there a way to actually look at the cost? Because let's be honest, nowadays I go to anybody, even if they agree 100% that the change is needed and they will bring a benefit, the question will always be how much. I mean, how much benefit is it actually bringing? So I was just wondering if there is any way to to try to find a correct way to measure this?
Yeah, and I would make sure I'm going to talk about the cost benefit analysis of doing change management on this initiative or not, which I think is different than the cost benefit analysis of, is this the right change to be taking on? And so I'll step back one step just to make sure. I'll offer up at least my definition. You don't have to accept mine, but at least you know what page I'm coming from. That change leadership is deciding where to go and how to get there. Change management is helping our people get there too. Project management is building whatever we need to get there, whether it's a hardware, software, product. So change leadership is deciding where to go and how to get there. Change management is helping our people get there too. Project management is building whatever we need to get there. So Marco, much of the ROI of the change at the change leadership piece to me is really gets into governance, prioritization. That's leaders setting strategy. When we get down to, is it worth investing in change management on this initiative or not? And notice the choice of word I picked, right? This is about acknowledging that tending to the people side of change is an investment in capturing the ROI we expected. And part of our shift that we work with senior leaders is that mindset of the people side of change is not an expense line. It's an investment in capturing the people dependent return on investment of this project. And so we really try to work towards that anchor. We actually have an ROI calculator that lets you take the ROI of a project and pull it apart to estimate the adoption contribution, the people dependent portion. So I was working with a big tech firm. They were doing this project. The practitioners got together. They did the ROI of change management calculator. They came up with 62% of the project ROI depends on adoption and usage. I'm not a betting man, but I'd put money on the line that it probably isn't 62%, right? Just based on pure normal distributions, it might be 61, 63, 60, 64. But it doesn't matter because all of a sudden they had a label that meant the portion of this project value that we expect that depends on people. And they would start invoking it in meetings. Are we doing enough to capture the 62%? Are we on target? Are we on track? You're putting project controls against the people side activities to capture that people dependent ROI. And so that's the way we start to go that direction. Then we can look the other direction and start to say, what are the costs and risks of poor adoption and usage? We can actually start to assign cost and risk that is avoidable because human beings experience change as a process, and we can reduce the variation in that process if we support people. And so workarounds. The other one that I would put out there is the two most costly letters in the project world, R and E, as in, Dale got there, right? Retrain, redo, rescope, revisit, reassign, resign. There's all those recosts that are, and you as controllers probably have to account for a bunch of this stuff at the back end, right? Like, wait, we're going to have to do a whole nother batch of training. I thought we already did that training 2 weeks ago. Oh, nobody had any idea why they were there 2 weeks ago. That's why we're redoing it, right? So there is upside capture of expected ROI that depends on people, and there's downside risk and cost protection based on those people side risks. And we have some clients in the financial services that'll get in and do full on dollar amount calculations. Usually once a leader experiences a change with good change management once, they no longer ask for the justification after that, because they realize change management is a discipline that lets them achieve what they promised to deliver better than they would have had they left this stuff up to chance. And so that's where leaders invest. Project managers spend on change management at first, then leaders begin investing in change management as a way to capture their strategic direction. So
I love it. I love it. Great question, Marco. And Val, second podcast episode in a row where different topics where we spoke about RE. On the last episode, last episode, Tim, we spoke about process mapping, value stream mapping, and how if you just look for those two letters, RE, you can eradicate a lot. And now we're on change management, and you've said almost exactly the same thing. So wow, it is interesting. But we do have to get our feature in. A bit of fun, Tim. This whole episode has been fun, but even more fun. It's called Defend the Indefensible. It's inspired by ridiculous statements that you hear every day and you just shake your head at and you don't usually answer. So we're going to throw a ridiculous statement at you. You have to defend it by arguing for it. and you have 30 seconds to do that. So a little bit of fun. Are you ready?
Let me ask a clarifying question. So I am defending the indefensible statement that you're going to throw at me.
Yes, you're arguing for it. You're arguing for it. Yeah.
If I start down the path of against it, just give me a wave and be like, no, you took a wrong turn, and I'll try to turn back to the other side.
Well, I think it should be quite obvious, but here we go. So the statement is, we don't need to worry about the people side of change management. The process needs to be watertight.
Gotcha. We don't need to worry about the people side. And I'm promoting this.
Yeah.
The quality of the process is the only thing that matters. People just do exactly what we tell them to. When we write down a process, they follow it exactly as it's written. Things here are so easy because people move around kind of operating like robots, following the code of the process that we described. Did I take it the wrong direction, or is that the right way?
No, you took it exactly the right direction.
Okay.
But I could see how through gritted teeth you were struggling there. That is the whole intent. It's a little bit of fun. And thank you for being an amazing sport, because it just goes against everything we've just been talking about.
The sad thing is we hear it every day, right?
Exactly.
We watch. I made a joke that I was going to quit pro-sigh and start a consulting company called Solutions Without Results, because I figure I can pitch it pretty good, right? I could land my first gig.
Sure.
You give us your best and your brightest. Give us 6 months. We'll come up with a wonderful solution. Throw it over the wall and give you no results. And we all laugh tongue in cheek about that I think I could land the second gig. After that, I'm probably out of business. But we do that so much inside of organizations, right? Solutions without results. We invest in the airtight process, Dale, without paying any attention because it's harder.
Yeah.
I mean, we hear change management called the soft side of change, but I'll tell you what, this people side of change is the harder side of change.
Agree.
There are technical complexities in technical solutions, but this is, and I think because it's hard, we shy away from it. But I think we're all leaning in because we realize it is that critical to the outcomes we try to achieve. So
agree. A massively untapped resource, pardon the pun. Anyway, one more feature before we let you go. It's called Fiverr. Quick fire questions, all about yourself. So it shouldn't take too long. Question 1: what would you rather spend your day with, people or technology?
People.
What's more important, time, cost, or quality?
I would say opportunity cost.
Fair point.
I think that's the most valuable thing there is.
Question 3: what's the best book you've been gifted?
Best book that I've been gifted. The Subtle Art of Not Giving an F by Mark Manson is probably right there at the top of my list.
That's awesome. Someone on this podcast gifted me that, Val.
Yeah,
it was amazing. Yeah, love that book. If you could choose to spend a day with anyone, past or present, who would it be and why?
I could spend a day with anyone, past or present. I love music, and I've been desperately missing live music. And so my answer right now would be Scott and Seth Avett, the Avett brothers, because I cannot wait to see them. And right now I've got, I don't know when the next time I'm going to be able to see them is. So I think I am going through such a yearning for live music that I went right to 2 musicians that I would get to spend the time with.
Awesome. I think a lot of people listening in agree with you there. Final question. If you had to spend $1 million in a day, what would you spend it on?
If I had $1 million?
If you had to spend it in a day. Yeah.
There's Bare Naked Lady fans. They have a song called If I Had $1 Million. If I had to spend it in a day, what would I invest in? To me, helping kids tap into educational opportunities they might not be able to because they don't have the finances to do it is something that kind of gets me really going. So I think I would try to find a bunch of kids who could go to the best college but have no financial means to get there and help them figure out a path towards an educational tier that they might not have been able to access otherwise.
Amazing, and so noble and so close to our hearts, because the 2 charities we support on the Project Chatter podcast are lined up to that as well. They support both teachers and children that need fair opportunities in life. So yeah, couldn't agree with you more there, Tim. It's been amazing. I and Val as well. We're so humbled that you've been able to join us on the podcast. It's been an amazing chat. We'd love to have you back. There's so many rabbit holes we didn't go down, so we can continue for days and hours. Marco, it's been amazing that you stepped in for Martin. So thank you very much for that, Marco. But before we go, Tim, any final thoughts you want to leave the listeners with?
The thing I've been noodling on is Peter Drucker passed it on to Jim Collins, and I heard him talking about it. It's Drucker's probing question, is how do we help our organizations and society become more productive and more humane at the same time? Because I can achieve one at the expense of the other all day long, but becoming more humane and more productive is really kind of that goal. And I think the neat thing is this, as we start to think about and approach our projects and initiatives with this expanded mindset that there is a technical side and a people side that both drive results and outcomes, I think we actually can thread that needle of helping organizational change be more productive, because we know in the data, on time, on budget, less risky, meet objectives, and more humane by positioning our people to succeed in the changes we're asking them to take on. So that's the thing that I think, it gets me up in the morning, that we're driving better ROI and treating people the right way when we put this stuff to life in our projects and initiatives. So, and thank you very much for the opportunity. I really enjoyed the conversation. This was really fun just to explore these various, dimensions and perspectives. And I look forward to joining you the next time, and hopefully seeing you again, Marco. Otherwise, wishing Martin a happy belated birthday.
Awesome. I agree. And I have to give a shout out to Paul Major, because Paul Major spoke to us in episode 63, and he was the one that sort of gave us a step into the pro-sigh world, and that's where folks can go back and listen to that, and where Val introduces Prosci, and we have a good laugh about that. But thanks, Paul Major. Val, any final thoughts before we go?
No, you covered it well. Tim, thank you for being on the show. Again, I'm quite versed in Peter Drucker as well. He's got a great quote I just want to leave the listeners with. There is nothing so useless as doing efficiently that which should not be done at all. And I think that lines up perfectly with what you were talking about, Tim. We do really need to wonder what we're doing sometimes and make sure we've got that vision. And the last thing is, the one constant I can see, at least for the immediate future, is change. Change is constant. So do listen up. Do get to these free resources on the ProScience website. And thanks for your time, Tim. Really appreciated it.
My pleasure. And be safe and be well, everybody.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Tim Creasey. Yeah, I love ending on a quote as well, Val. So thank you for adding that one in. Folks, that is all the time we have. It's over. But remember to hit subscribe before you go. A massive thank you once again to our guest, Mr. Tim Creasey. And thank you all for listening. Till next time, we say stay safe, be disruptive, and have fun doing it. From me, Val, and Marco, it's bye for now.